What if the biggest regret of a man who had everything, fame, fortune, sold-out stadiums, and some of the world's most beautiful women, was not a failed career, a bad decision, or a lost opportunity, but one woman he could never forget? For decades, Rod Stewart's love life dominated headlines. There were supermodels, heartbreaks, marriages, and dramatic second chances. Yet recently, the rock legend made a surprisingly honest confession about the woman he believes he never should have let slip away. Considering the extraordinary life he has lived, that admission stunned many people. Because behind the fame, the success, and the larger-than-life image was a relationship that left wounds far deeper than most fans ever realized. So, who was the woman Rod Stewart could never truly forget? To understand that, we first need to go back to where it all began. When Rod Stewart was born in North London on January 10, 1945, World War II was still raging across Europe. Britain was a country struggling through uncertainty, rationing, and hardship. But inside the Stewart household, life felt very different. His father worked as a construction manager, his mother dedicated herself to raising the family, and Rod, the youngest of 5 children, quickly became the center of attention. Being the baby of the family had its advantages. He was showered with affection, spoiled endlessly, and protected from life's harsher realities for as long as possible. Looking back years later, Stewart would describe his childhood as fantastically happy, a period filled with warmth, love, and security. That happiness, however, came with an unexpected downside. Responsibility never came naturally to him. Growing up, 2 passions dominated the Stewart household above everything else: soccer and music. The family lived and breathed both. On the soccer field, young Rod was impossible to ignore. He was fearless, competitive, aggressive, and remarkably talented. Those around him genuinely believed he had what it took to become a professional player. For a while, it seemed like his future had already been decided. But while soccer captured one part of his heart, music captured the other. The Stewart family admired American singer Al Jolson, but the artist who truly changed Rod's life was Little Richard. Everything about him, the explosive energy, the unforgettable voice, the confidence, and the swagger, completely mesmerized the young boy. Rod became obsessed. Seeing his growing passion, his father eventually bought him his first guitar, unknowingly placing another possible future in his hands. Suddenly, Stewart found himself caught between 2 dreams, both pulling him in different directions. At just 15 years old, he made a decision that would terrify most parents. He dropped out of school to pursue a career in professional soccer. School had never felt like the right place for him anyway. In his autobiography, Rod Stewart admitted that nobody was surprised when he failed his 11+ examination and was transferred to William Grimshaw Secondary Modern School. Although he tried to fit in, he never connected with academics or structure. As the years passed, things only became more difficult. He frequently clashed with teachers, and his behavior often landed him in trouble. At one point, he was even caned. Eventually, he walked away from school altogether, leaving with no qualifications, no clear plan, and a future filled with uncertainty. Still, Stewart believed soccer could be his escape. He earned a trial with Brentford FC, a third-division club at the time. For years, stories circulated claiming the club wanted to sign him. But Stewart later revealed a much harsher truth. After the trial, they never even bothered to call him back. The dream he had chased so passionately was over almost as quickly as it had begun. For many people, that kind of rejection would have been devastating. Surprisingly, Stewart was not completely heartbroken. Part of the reason was something remarkably simple. He loved having a good time. In his mind, the life of a musician seemed far more appealing than the disciplined lifestyle of a professional athlete. He believed music offered freedom, excitement, and the possibility of success without sacrificing the things he enjoyed most. So, when soccer closed one door, he turned toward music without looking back. Unfortunately, dreams of becoming a rock star did not pay the bills. To help support his family, Stewart began working at his father's newspaper stand. By then, his father had left the construction industry and purchased the shop where the family also lived upstairs. Rod spent his mornings delivering newspapers throughout London while continuing to hold on to the dream that one day he would become a singer. Every newspaper he delivered felt like another step through ordinary life, but in his mind, he was already imagining himself on stage. Reality, however, had a way of pulling him back down to earth. After leaving the newspaper business, Stewart found work as a screen printer at a wallpaper company through his father's connections. At first, the job seemed promising. The pay was respectable, especially for someone his age, and he was finally able to contribute financially to the household. But then fate intervened in the most ironic way possible. Stewart discovered he was colorblind. For someone working in wallpaper printing, it was a disaster. Almost overnight, the opportunity disappeared, and he was once again thrown back into uncertainty. What followed was a series of unusual and often difficult jobs. He worked with picture frames, trained as an electrician, and even spent time working at Highgate Cemetery. If that sounded unusual, his next job was even stranger. Stewart eventually found himself employed at a funeral home, surrounded by grieving families and the constant presence of death. It was a world far removed from the bright lights and roaring crowds he dreamed about. Yet through every setback, every temporary job, and every disappointment, he refused to let go of music. Then, at just 16 years old, something finally seemed to change. Stewart joined a band called the Raiders, and for the first time, it felt as though his dream might actually be within reach. The group secured an audition with legendary producer Joe Meek, one of the most influential figures in British music. For a young man who had spent years struggling to find his place in the world, this looked like the breakthrough he had been waiting for. It felt like the moment that would change everything. But instead of launching his career, the audition would become one of the most humiliating experiences of his life. During the audition, Meek heard Stewart singing and reacted in a way that would scar almost any young musician. He stormed into the studio, covered his ears, and began screaming for Stewart to stop. According to the story, Meek would not calm down until Rod packed up and left. It was a brutal experience for a teenager who was already struggling to find direction in life. The rejection felt deeply personal, and Stewart likely walked away feeling both humiliated and furious. Ironically, history would later reveal that Joe Meek's judgment was far from perfect. He also passed on the opportunity to work with David Bowie and famously dismissed the Beatles as nothing more than noise. However, that knowledge probably did little to soften the pain at the time. Carrying that frustration with him, Stewart gradually drifted into London's expanding counterculture movement. He became involved in anti-nuclear protests, surrounded himself with beatniks, and embraced a communal lifestyle centered on activism, politics, and rebellion. To outsiders, it appeared that Rod Stewart had become passionately devoted to social causes and the pursuit of world peace. Yet Stewart later admitted that his motivations were not entirely ideological. He attended many of the protests simply because he hoped to meet women. During this turbulent period of his life, he eventually encountered someone who would profoundly influence his future, although that relationship would also bring painful consequences. One of the most controversial chapters in Rod Stewart's personal life began in 1962 when he met an artist named Susanna Buffy at a nightclub. Their relationship progressed rapidly, fueled by youth, recklessness, and the excitement of London's growing music and nightlife culture. Before long, Buffy discovered that she was pregnant. For most people, such news changes everything, but Stewart was only 17 years old. Rather than stepping into the responsibilities of fatherhood or marriage, he chose to distance himself completely. Supported by his family, he decided he wanted no part of settling down. While Buffy prepared to face motherhood on her own, Stewart simply walked away. Years later, the painful truth surrounding that period of Buffy's life became widely known. In 2013, Stewart released a song titled Brighton Beach, describing it as a tribute to a real woman from his past. It did not take long for listeners to realize that the song referred to Buffy, the mother of his first child. However, when she eventually heard it, she reacted with anger. The song portrayed their relationship in a gentle, romantic light and even suggested that her father had contributed to their separation. Buffy remembered events very differently. According to her account, Stewart abandoned her as soon as he learned she was carrying his child. While Brighton Beach may have represented youthful romance and nostalgia for Stewart, it symbolized something entirely different for Buffy. To her, it marked the place where her boyfriend ended their relationship and left her to confront an overwhelming situation alone. The circumstances soon became even more difficult. After her landlord discovered that she was unmarried and pregnant, she was evicted from her home. Suddenly homeless and vulnerable, Buffy found herself living in a residence for unwed teenage mothers, where young women were expected to perform hard labor in exchange for shelter. Despite the heartbreak and uncertainty, part of her still believed that Stewart might eventually return. Then, in November 1963, She gave birth alone at Whittington Hospital in London. Stewart appeared only after the birth, but not because he was prepared to embrace fatherhood. Instead, he presented a shocking proposal. He asked whether she would give the baby up for adoption, so that the two of them could continue their relationship. Although Buffy ultimately placed the child for adoption, her decision had nothing to do with preserving the romance. By that point, the relationship had already been irreparably damaged. While this painful chapter unfolded behind him, Stewart immersed himself even more deeply in music. He became active in the folk scene, busking on London streets and pursuing every opportunity available to him. Eventually, he joined forces with folk singer Wiz Jones, and together they traveled through cities such as Paris and Barcelona, living the wandering and unstable lifestyle that was common among struggling musicians of the era. Barcelona, however, brought new difficulties. Stewart and his fellow musicians survived from one day to the next, often sleeping rough and taking shelter beneath bridges whenever necessary. Local authorities eventually concluded that he resembled a vagrant more than an artist, and before long he was deported from the country altogether. Nevertheless, setbacks like these could not diminish his determination to pursue music. A few years earlier, Stewart had casually taken up the harmonica, never realizing how significant that skill would eventually become. His ability with the instrument earned him a place in a band called the Dimensions, where he contributed both harmonica and vocals. While performing with the group, he unexpectedly found himself sharing venues with one of Britain's biggest musical acts, the Rolling Stones. Watching Mick Jagger command an audience from close range proved to be a defining moment. Standing backstage and witnessing the swagger, confidence, and chaos that surrounded rock stardom, Stewart suddenly understood exactly what he wanted from life. From that point forward, he no longer dreamed of merely becoming a singer. He aspired to become a true rock star. He wanted to become a rock star, but the problem was that success in music still seemed miles away. By 1964, Stewart remained largely unknown and was still busking at Twickenham railway station, playing harmonica for spare change. One day, after watching a performance by musician Long John Baldry, Stewart happened to be playing at the station when Baldry himself walked by and heard him. That random moment changed everything. Baldry was impressed enough to invite Stewart to join his band as a harmonica player. Then, after hearing him sing, he realized there was something much bigger there. Stewart quickly became a permanent member of the group, and suddenly doors started opening. Performing with Baldry eventually earned Stewart a slot opening for the Rolling Stones, bringing him even closer to the world he desperately wanted to break into. From there, he joined the Jeff Beck Group and later became part of Faces in 1969, all while quietly building a solo career on the side. It was an exhausting grind, but Stewart thrived on it. He juggled bands, tours, recordings, and solo projects all at once, determined to leave his mark on one of the most competitive industries in the world. Eventually, the hard work paid off in spectacular fashion. Stewart exploded into mainstream success in America, becoming one of the biggest rock stars of the 1970s. Songs like Tonight's the Night and Do You Think I'm Sexy made him a household name. With fame came everything he had imagined: money, parties, celebrity circles, and endless attention from women. By Stewart's own admission, his romantic life became so chaotic during his Faces years that he eventually lost count of how many women he had been involved with. One of those women was actress Joanna Lumley, long before she became internationally famous for Absolutely Fabulous. Ironically, when they first met, Lumley had no idea Stewart was a rock star. She later explained that she struggled with facial recognition and genuinely did not recognize him. Still, she agreed to go out with him, and by all accounts, Stewart left a positive impression on her. Lumley later recalled riding with him in one of his fast sports cars when she suggested speeding past slower drivers. Stewart refused, calmly explaining that owning a faster car did not give someone the right to behave rudely on the road. It was a surprisingly grounded moment from a man already surrounded by excess. Their relationship eventually faded for a reason Stewart later admitted with some embarrassment. Lumley's refined upper-class accent intimidated him. Compared to his rough North London roots, he felt out of place around her. Before long, Stewart found himself single again, while trouble also began brewing inside Faces. By the mid-1970s, the band was clearly falling apart, and when the group officially split in 1975, Stewart fully committed himself to a solo career. The timing could not have been better. His ballad Sailing, became a massive success across the United Kingdom and the Netherlands. Even though the song failed to make much impact in America, Stewart was already becoming one of Britain's biggest stars. He moved comfortably through elite celebrity circles, partying alongside actors, musicians, and socialites. One of those celebrities was actress and author Joan Collins, who decided Stewart should meet her friend Britt Ekland, the stunning Swedish actress famous for appearing as a Bond girl in The Man with the Golden Gun. The attraction between Stewart and Ekland was immediate. Before long, they were living together, and Ekland quickly became one of the biggest inspirations behind Stewart's music. While searching for ideas for a new song, Stewart found himself drawing heavily from their passionate relationship. The result became one of the biggest hits of his career, Tonight's the Night. The song was seductive, provocative, and packed with innuendo. It also finally gave Stewart the breakthrough he had been chasing in America. Tonight's the Night shot to #1 in both the United States and Canada, transforming him from a successful British rocker into a full-blown international superstar. But even as his career soared, his personal life remained chaotic. During their relationship, Ekland introduced Stewart to her friend, actress Susan George. Before long, Stewart began having an affair with her, effectively destroying his relationship with Ekland. Stewart later offered a very different explanation for the breakup, claiming that things soured after Ekland once tried putting makeup on him, something he felt clashed with his macho image. However, for many people, the affair seemed like the far more believable reason. Not long after the split, Stewart moved into another high-profile relationship, this time with blonde model Alana Collins, who had previously been married to actor George Hamilton. Unlike many of Stewart's earlier romances, this one became serious enough to lead to marriage. Ironically, even at 34 years old, Stewart's father believed his son was still too immature to settle down. Years later, Stewart admitted that his father may have been right. Part of him felt he had rushed into marriage before fully getting the wild lifestyle out of his system. Still, the wedding went ahead, and the couple soon welcomed 2 children, daughter Kimberly Stewart and son Sean Stewart. For a brief period, it seemed as though Rod Stewart might finally be settling into a more stable family life. However, that sense of stability proved short-lived. Before long, Stewart entered another relationship, this time with model Kelly Berg. Stewart's relationship with the Sports Illustrated model ultimately became the final blow to his marriage with Alana Collins. The divorce had a devastating impact on Collins. Years later, she admitted that the breakup completely shattered her emotionally, and the fact that Berg was 15 years younger only intensified the pain. Stewart later confessed that ending relationships was never something he handled well. In his own words, he described himself as a coward when it came to breaking up with women. Even after the collapse of another marriage, Stewart showed little sign of slowing down. By that stage of his life, a clear pattern had emerged. He undeniably had a type, tall, glamorous blonde models. Yet while he appeared endlessly fascinated by romance and attraction, fatherhood often seemed to complicate matters for him. His relationship with Kelly Berg followed a familiar course. Once Berg became pregnant, the relationship gradually lost its spark, and Stewart's attention began drifting elsewhere. Rather than embracing domestic life, he immersed himself even more deeply in the wild celebrity lifestyle he had spent years cultivating. During that era, Stewart openly boasted about the sheer number of women he was sleeping with. He owned a bright yellow Lamborghini and frequently drove from his home in Windsor to London, a journey of approximately 45 minutes, simply to spend evenings at his favorite nightclub. One particular story perfectly illustrated the lifestyle he was leading at the time. After meeting a woman at the club one night, Stewart drove her all the way back to Windsor, spent the night with her, and then drove her straight back to London afterward without even stopping for breakfast. Yet the night did not end there. After dropping her off, he returned to the club, met another woman, and drove all the way back to Windsor once again for what he described as round 2. Stewart later joked that he waited until the following morning before sleeping with the second woman, apparently believing that this detail somehow made the story more respectable. As outrageous as his lifestyle became, Stewart somehow managed to avoid the self-destruction that consumed many rock stars of his generation. He frequently credited 2 passions for keeping him grounded enough to survive: soccer and women. According to Stewart, those interests prevented him from falling too deeply into hard drugs or extreme alcoholism. In his view, excessive addiction would have ruined his ability to play sports and damaged his sex life, two things he valued immensely. At least to some extent, Stewart understood why so many women were attracted to him. He acknowledged that fame played a major role. Being a wealthy and internationally famous rock star naturally opened doors that most men would never experience. However, he also recognized a darker truth beneath all the attention. He admitted that he had not always treated women particularly well. Stewart often defended himself by arguing that most men would behave similarly if they lived under constant celebrity temptation. In his opinion, fame merely amplified behaviors that already existed. Then another woman entered his life who fit his now famous pattern perfectly. In the late 1980s, Stewart met New Zealand model Rachel Hunter at a nightclub in Los Angeles. She was tall, blonde, exceptionally beautiful, and more than 2 decades younger than him. Hunter was only 21 years old at the time. There was, however, one complication. She was already in a relationship with musician Kip Winger, bassist for Alice Cooper's band. Nevertheless, once Hunter got to know Stewart, events progressed remarkably quickly. She soon left Winger, and only 3 months after meeting Stewart, the two were married. For Stewart, this relationship felt different from many of those that had come before. He became convinced that Hunter was the woman with whom he would finally settle down. The couple quickly started a family, welcoming their daughter Renee in 1992 and their son Liam in 1994. Contrary to many assumptions people later made, it was not Stewart who destroyed the marriage through infidelity. In fact, Stewart has repeatedly insisted that Rachel Hunter was the one woman he never cheated on. Instead, it was Hunter who ultimately left the relationship in 1999. According to Stewart, she grew weary of the celebrity lifestyle and no longer wished to live amid the chaos that accompanied being married to one of the world's most famous rock stars. She desired a quieter and more ordinary life. Her decision deeply devastated him. Despite Stewart's many stories about casual relationships and endless partying, the breakup with Hunter genuinely appeared to wound him profoundly. Yet, as he had done throughout his life, he eventually moved forward. In 1999, while preparing for a tour, Stewart's team hired a photographer named Penny Lancaster. She was not only a photographer but also a successful model, standing noticeably taller than Stewart and possessing a striking presence. The chemistry between them seemed immediate. Interestingly, Stewart's own bandmates initially tried to prevent the romance from developing. One of his bass players recognized that Stewart was emotionally rebounding from the collapse of his marriage to Hunter and feared that he would simply return to his old habits. After obtaining Lancaster's phone number, the bassist reportedly kept it hidden from Stewart for 6 months, convinced that the singer was not in the right state of mind to begin another serious relationship. Looking back, Stewart later admitted that his bandmate had probably been right. Although Rod Stewart had a long history of relationships, once he finally connected with Penny Lancaster, he became completely captivated by her. Determined to impress her, he once took her shopping at a Dolce & Gabbana store and encouraged her to purchase an entirely new wardrobe. By the end of the trip, Stewart had spent approximately $12,000. However, there was an unusual condition attached to this extravagant gift. He told Penny that she could only wear the clothes when they were together. Despite this possessive request, Lancaster chose to remain with him. Her family, however, was much less enthusiastic about the relationship. By that time, Stewart's reputation as a notorious womanizer was impossible to ignore. Lancaster's father reportedly disliked the relationship from the beginning, while her brother, Oliver, feared that Stewart would draw her into a destructive celebrity lifestyle filled with addiction and scandal. Ironically, Oliver's opinion later changed so dramatically that he eventually accepted a job working for Stewart himself. In 2005, Stewart and Lancaster welcomed their first child together, a son named Alistair. 2 years later, Stewart surprised many people by marrying for the 3rd time. The wedding took place in Portofino, Italy, and shortly afterward the couple welcomed another son, Aidan. By this point, Stewart was already the father of 8 children. Yet, for the first time in decades, he appeared genuinely ready to embrace family life in a more stable and committed manner. Just as life seemed to have settled down, a forgotten chapter from Stewart's past unexpectedly resurfaced. In 2007, while Stewart was working with his band in a Los Angeles recording studio, the receptionist called upstairs with an unusual message. A young woman downstairs was claiming to be his daughter. Initially, Stewart assumed it was some sort of scam. To avoid potential embarrassment, he sent bandmate Jim Cregan downstairs to investigate before agreeing to meet her himself. The moment Cregan saw the woman, his doubts disappeared. She looked remarkably like Rod Stewart. The young woman introduced herself as Sarah Streeter. As Stewart pieced together the story, he realized that she was the daughter he had fathered decades earlier with Susanna Buffy, the same relationship that had inspired the song Maggie May. Sarah's life had been far from easy. For years she struggled with addiction and emotional difficulties before eventually learning the truth about her biological father from her adoptive parents. The revelation was surreal. Stewart had been famous for so long that his photograph had literally hung on her bedroom wall throughout her childhood. Following the death of her adoptive mother, Sarah finally decided to contact him. The relationship between father and daughter was initially awkward, shaped by years of separation and unanswered questions. However, with time, their bond gradually improved, and Sarah eventually became accepted as part of the wider Stewart family. Even as Stewart settled into family life, stories from his wild past continued to follow him. One of the strangest resurfaced publicly during a 2012 appearance on Katie Couric's talk show. Couric confronted him about a decades-old urban legend, claiming that he had once ended up in a hospital emergency room after an outrageous night of partying with sailors. The rumor had followed Stewart for years and had become one of the most bizarre stories in rock music gossip. Clearly uncomfortable, Stewart firmly denied the claim and insisted that he was completely heterosexual. He explained that he believed the rumor originated from a former publicist whom he had fired years earlier. According to Stewart, the dismissed publicist spread the story as an act of revenge. The rumor could never be conclusively verified because, according to Stewart, the man had since passed away. Although Stewart appeared embarrassed by that particular rumor, he often seemed surprisingly proud of many other outrageous stories connected to his romantic life. In his autobiography, he openly admitted to cheating on one centerfold model with another. He also confessed that during his relationship with Kelly Berg, he had been unfaithful to her as well. For many observers, these revelations prompted the same recurring question. What exactly made Rod Stewart so irresistible to women? Ironically, Stewart himself claimed that his secret was remarkably simple. For decades, he relied on the same pickup line whenever approaching women. Although it sounded absurd on paper, it apparently worked for him repeatedly. Of course, it likely helped that the person delivering the line was a millionaire rock icon with one of the most recognizable voices in music history. After 3 marriages, 8 children, countless relationships, and decades spent living one of rock music's wildest lifestyles, Stewart eventually reflected on what he had learned about love and marriage. True to his personality, even his conclusions were wrapped in humor and cynicism. Rather than marrying again if he ever became single in the future, Stewart joked that he would simply find a woman he did not like and buy her a house instead. Despite being happily married to Penny Lancaster today, Stewart has recently spent more time reflecting on the relationships that shaped his life. During an interview with The Times, he recalled the night he first met Penny in a bar shortly after the collapse of his marriage to his second wife, Rachel Hunter. Before Rachel, Stewart had been married to Alana Stewart from 1979 to 1984, making his romantic history a long and complicated journey marked by success, heartbreak, and reinvention. According to Stewart's recollection, Penny initially approached him to ask for an autograph. However, the encounter quickly became far more memorable. Captivated by her confidence and beauty, Stewart later described her as an incredible dancer who immediately stood out from everyone else in the room. Behind this charming story, however, was a period of deep personal pain. Stewart admitted that although he was fortunate enough to find love again, the end of his marriage to Rachel Hunter affected him profoundly. There was a 6-month period between the breakup and meeting Penny, partly because Stewart's bass player refused to give him Penny's phone number. According to Stewart, his friend believed he needed time to enjoy being single rather than rushing directly into another serious relationship. Stewart later acknowledged that his bandmate was probably right, joking that he made the most of those months. Beneath the humor, however, was genuine heartbreak. Stewart openly admitted that Rachel's departure devastated him emotionally. Looking back, he believed that their significant age difference played a major role in the failure of the marriage. Rachel was only 21 years old when she married the 45-year-old rock star, a gap that concerned Stewart's family from the outset. His own sister reportedly warned him that the marriage might not succeed in the long term. In many respects, Rachel Hunter later agreed with that assessment. Speaking to the New Zealand Herald years afterward, she acknowledged that her youth had significantly influenced the breakup. She explained that life simply unfolded as it did, and that, although hurting Stewart had been painful for her, both of them eventually came to understand why the marriage could not survive.